Hi, good evening, everyone. Apologies for any technical issues that you are having. I've copied and pasted a very clickable link, which should be working for everyone if you wanted to forward it along and share it to anyone else you know that's having difficulties joining this meeting, please do so. We are working on resolving that issue at this moment. But with that, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City of Toronto's virtual town hall on ensuring safe and accessible pedestrian routes and construction work zones. This is a 2-hour meeting taking place from 6 p.m. until 8 p.m. Next slide. I'm going to pause a moment for the land acknowledgement. As we all know, Toronto is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples, and continues to be home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The land is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are all treaty people. The network of streets, lanes, trails, and other rights-of-way cover approximately 1/5 of the land within the city. Today, we take part in an ongoing history determining how to share the land that is dedicated to public rights-of-way. Next, I would like to introduce Camilla Lamothe, who is supporting our meeting today and will be reading our African ancestral acknowledgement. Oh, Camilla, you are muted.
Sorry, everyone. African Ancestral Acknowledgement. The City of Toronto acknowledges all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or in generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. Thank you.
So, thank you, Camilla. This meeting will be recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded but want to participate, you can provide your input over email at accessiblecwz@toronto.ca. The format of this meeting is a presentation followed by a 20 to 30-minute question and answer session. When asking your question, be brief and limit yourself to one question or comment at a time. There will be other opportunities to engage after our town hall tonight. Be direct and frame your questions to specific speakers. Be a good listener and keep an open mind. Be respectful. The City of Toronto is an inclusive public organization. Racist or other forms of discriminatory, prejudicial, or hateful comments and questions will not be tolerated. And just for some housekeeping, as you may notice, we have American Sign Language and Communication Access Real-Time Translation services that are provided for this meeting for people who are hearing impaired. You can find the interpreters on the first video tile on your screen. You will be muted throughout this presentation. And for the question and answer portion of our meeting, we encourage you to ask your question during that portion and in the question and answer box. Please direct your questions to Charissa Yonia or to the general audience. We use the question box to type in your question, which will be read out loud and answered by staff. Anyone unable to use this feature due to accessibility needs can verbally ask their question. Use the raised hand feature. You will be unmuted once your name is called. You will see the raised hand right next to your name if you toggle over it, and at the bottom of your screen. If we run out of time for questions, they will be recorded and addressed in a question and answer document. Please direct your questions to the Q&A box to ensure it is recorded. Accessible documents, including this slide deck, recording link, and Q&A documents will be shared to the email address you provided upon entering this virtual meeting room. If you would like future communications about engagement for this project, email us at accessiblecwz@toronto.ca. Perfect. So the City of Toronto recognizes that the language used to refer to people with disabilities has an impact. Please be mindful of the language you use and the meaning. Consistent with the language and terminology standards set by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, People First language is used throughout this presentation. In the context of this meeting, access and accessibility is understood in the following ways. Access is a way or means of getting into a space, obtaining a product, device, information, or services. Whereas accessibility means ensuring independent, equitable, and dignified access to persons with disabilities, including but not limited to those with visual, auditory, cognitive, and mobility-related disabilities. This presentation describes work to ensure accessibility of sidewalks and construction zones for people with disabilities and safe routes for people who cycle. The purpose of distinguishing pedestrians with disabilities in the context of this work is to recognize the specific geometric design features required to prevent pedestrian paths in construction zones from creating barriers for people with disabilities. This does not diminish the fact that at times some people with disabilities may use bicycles as mobility aids. Today, we have a host of transportation services staff presenting to you, as well as support staff. My name is Teresa Ionia, and I'm the Acting Senior Project Manager in Strategic Policy and Initiatives. Today, I am joined by other presenters, including Roger Brown, Director of Traffic Management, Stuart McGee, Manager of Work Zone Construction Coordination, sorry, I've lost my place, Jennifer Neese, Manager of Strategic Policy and Initiatives, and our support staff includes Julie Rice, who will be navigating our presentation today, and Camilla Lamoth, who you met earlier, and will be monitoring the question and chat box with me during the Q&A session. We also have interpretation service staff provided through the Canadian Hearing Services, including Jamie, Christy, who's on the screen with me right now, and Sarah, who's behind the scenes providing cart services. I would like to now introduce Roger Brown, our MC for tonight, and the Director of Traffic Management. Roger has a full work program and oversees the construction and work zone coordination program at the City of Toronto. He also oversees the operation of the over 2,400 traffic signals across our city, the new traffic agent program, the school crossing guard program, and the traffic safety and efficiency related investigations. Roger?
Great, thanks, Teresa. And I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight and thank you all for coming. And I really, really appreciate the time that you guys are taking to meet with us and hear the progress that we've made on this very, very critical and important file with respect to all the work that we do. As Teresa mentioned, my name is Roger Brown. I am the Director for Traffic Management here at the City of Toronto. And among my various hats that I wear, responsibilities, one of the key areas is with respect to construction work zone coordination. And over the past few years, I've really been leading the team to take a much more concerted focus on the issue of accessibility through construction work zones. You know, accessibility for all residents and visitors to the City of Toronto is a basic human right within the city. We absolutely need to ensure that all of our work zones are made as accessible as possible. That being said, we recognize that we are a long way from where we need to be. But between myself, my team, and many others of the staff within the City of Toronto, we are very much committed to this cause. And we have been making some progress over the past year in terms of consultation with members of some of the folks on this call and others that we met with that now we're at the stage of rolling with the ideas and concepts and moving into more of an implementation stage. And very eager and excited to share with all of you tonight the progress we've made to date, and also to give you a little bit of a glimpse of what's coming next. We do have a very packed agenda tonight. Next slide, please. We've already gone through our opening comments and meeting logistics and housekeeping. Obviously going through the agenda right now. We do have some very distinguished guests here tonight, both Deputy Mayor Councillor McKelvey and Councillor Myers and Chair of TAC. From there, I'm going to be providing a brief summary of the meeting purpose tonight. I'll be going through our decision and reporting history, talking about our engagement process and the key findings from that process that we did just last year. Then we're going to be talking about some of the current and ongoing work, next steps on the project, and I believe we'll have time at the end for any questions that you may have for us. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce one of our very distinguished guests here tonight, Councillor McKelvey, who is the Deputy Mayor for East area of the city. She is the Councillor for Scarborough Rouge Park, Ward 25, and she's also Chair of the Infrastructure and Environment Committee. After being elected to her second term of office in 2022, Dr. Jennifer McKelvey was appointed Deputy Mayor, and in this capacity assumed the responsibilities of the office of the Mayor during its vacancy from February to July of 2023. So on that, if I could turn it over to you, Deputy Mayor.
Well, thank you, Roger, and thank you so much for everything you do. I think you have one of the toughest jobs in the city of Toronto because I am sure there are always difficulties when you're dealing with construction and congestion, and you are trying to tackle two of our city's biggest challenges. So thank you for that. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to join you this evening. I am also delighted that my colleague, Councillor Jamal Myers, is also here. And as chair of the Infrastructure and Environment Committee, I've had the opportunity to hear feedback from the Accessibility Advisory Committee and from accessibility advocates on many issues, including micromobility, complete streets projects, Cafe TO, and many more. And your feedback is so important to ensure that all perspectives and experiences are considered. And our city is transforming before our eyes. We're growing, we're changing, and we are experiencing a significant time of economic investment. And there is more construction happening right now in Toronto than in any other city in North America. We have 240 cranes in the sky. We have $30 billion in transit construction underway. And we know that there are a lot of growing pains that are associated with all of that. In the long run, we will benefit from new rapid transit, more housing and upgraded infrastructure and utilities. And all this will support economic growth and ensure reliable service to our growing population for decades into the future. It's an investment that the next generation will thank us for. But while it is happening, there are multiple inconveniences and the risk of creating barriers for people moving around our city. And part of the city's job during this time is to ensure that all Toronto residents and visitors can meet their daily needs and participate as fully as they wish with all that Toronto has to offer. And this means ensuring that construction conditions do not deter or obstruct participation by creating unpassable or unsafe conditions for pedestrians, especially those with disabilities or for cyclists. With this in mind, over the past year, we have increased emphasis on ensuring that all sidewalk users have accessible, convenient, and clearly marked alternatives in any place where a sidewalk is disrupted by construction, and also that the safety of cyclists is addressed when bike infrastructure is disrupted. And this has to happen for all projects, regardless of the size, the location, duration, or whether the project is led by the city, led by a utility company, or led by another public agency or a private developer. So we know we still have a lot of work to do to ensure that safe and accessible routes are provided consistently. And thank you for when you do see those problems to identify them to us. That is helpful. And today's presentation demonstrates the first progress we've made, but it's not the end of this work, and there's still a lot to do. The matter of making construction work zones more accessible is advancing the city's commitment to a more accessible Toronto. Thank you again for being here to hear about the city's work to ensure accessibility in construction zones and to share your feedback. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say. And again, please do continue to point out those problem spots to us. It's important that we learn from that and do better. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Really, really appreciate your support and endorsement of this very critical project. Before I move to our next distinguished guest, just a matter of housekeeping. I know there's a bit of a question from the audience about the PDF links on the website. Just wanted to let everyone know that they are working now if you wanted to go and reference or access those files. So without further ado, I'd also like to introduce our other distinguished guest this evening, Councillor Myers. Councillor Myers is the councillor for Scarborough North, Ward 23. Jamal Myers was elected as the councillor for Ward 23, Scarborough North in 2022, and is focused on improving the quality of life, safety and affordability of neighborhoods for residents in his beloved community of Scarborough North. He is the chair of the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee, and he's also the chair of the Toronto Transit Commission. So a lot of things in your plate, Councillor. Councillor Myers, thank you so much again for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Roger. And always good to share the stage with my amazing colleague, Deputy Mayor Jennifer McKelvey. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jamal Myers, and I have the privilege of serving as the City Councillor for Scarborough North, as well as chair of the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee and the TTC. As chair of the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee, I have been working with transportation services staff on addressing accessibility issues in our construction work zones. Though each project is temporary, continued investment leads to new projects, prolonging construction in some areas and extending the experience of construction and unpredictability for pedestrians and cyclists trying to navigate the city. As we build our city to become more accessible, we need to also provide accessibility during the construction periods. Even though construction zones may be temporary, they still affect the day-to-day lives of our citizens and must be treated in a way that acknowledges these experiences. Improving communications, providing a safe path for travel, training and education, and educating the industry and staff and enforcement are all key factors that contribute to achieving this accessibility. Over the past year, staff consulted with key stakeholders in the accessibility and cycling communities to understand their experiences and the challenges they face daily. We are here today to outline the solutions and the next steps that came out of these discussions. Intervening with simple communication solutions and harnessing technology to improve communications on the dynamic work taking place around our city streets will allow pedestrians and cyclists to better plan their routes and anticipate any potential impacts from construction work. Improving training and awareness for staff in the construction industry about how we make construction accessible will foster a proactive culture that recognizes this accessibility and safety for cyclists as part of the job for every person involved in overseeing construction work. Creating citywide changes at this scale will require a culture shift among the construction industry and with city staff who manage some of these construction work zones. This culture shift and change will take time, but together we are working towards a more accessible and inclusive city. I would like to once again thank Roger and his team, the entire accessibility and transportation team who have spent literally countless hours dedicated to creating a more accessible, equitable, and safer city for all of us, but in particular, those living with disabilities and those who use bikes in order to transport the city. I would also like to thank all of you who took the time to attend this evening to listen, learn, and provide your feedback. Hearing from residents and community leaders, and in particular your lived experiences, is a vital step in this process. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Myers. And again, really appreciate the time that both yourself and Deputy Mayor McKelvey have taken to join us here tonight and to really show council support and endorsement for this very critical initiative. So now I'm going to start talking about the purpose for our meeting here tonight. We're here to provide an update on the city's progress to ensure safe and accessible routes in construction work zones for pedestrians living with disabilities and for people cycling. And on that note, we're going to be talking a little bit about the stakeholder consultation process that took place last year, as well as the internal consultation process that was kind of happening in parallel, and well, quite frankly, is sort of continuing to evolve. as we move forward into an implementation stage to actually see tangible change out on the city streets. And from there, we'll be talking about next steps in terms of the work program, some reporting and updates that we are going to be providing to council on this, as well as continued engagement with many of you on this call. So first up, before we get into some of the other details, I want to take a step back and look at our decision and reporting history. And so on that note, we have, sorry, next slide. There we go. Yeah, so now I'd like to introduce Jennifer Neese. She is our Manager of Policy and Innovation. She's going to be taking us through a little bit of the decision and reporting history on this file to date. Jennifer?
Thank you, Roger, and good evening. Next slide. This is not a new issue. For some of you, it might be the first time that you've engaged with the city on this topic, but I'm going to take you back to February of 2022, when there were members of the public came to the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting to highlight the challenges that they were facing in construction zones and that were seen to be increasing quickly with the amount of construction in the city. Following those deputations, members of the public also came to the city's executive committee and expressed similar concerns. And as a result, City Council requested that the General Manager of Transportation Services and the Chief Engineer of the city report back on the tools and strategies that the city currently uses to ensure accessibility in the public realm surrounding private development, as well as capital city projects, including sidewalks, pathways, guidelines for standards, ramps, signage, wayfinding, and enforcement protocol for non-compliance. And a report was brought forward by staff to the Accessibility Advisory Committee in June of 2022, and then followed by a report to Executive Committee in July of that year with a detailed action plan of how the three capital divisions, transportation, engineering and construction services, and Toronto Water, would address this issue together. In June of 2023, the first report back on that action plan was made to the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee, and it focused on public consultation that looked at all of the barriers experienced by people with disabilities in the sidewalk and intersection realm, the pedestrian realm. And among that consultation, there was a representative public survey of over 1,000 people with disabilities in the city of Toronto who identified construction zones as the #1 area of concern. So this validated and reinforced the information that we had been hearing from the public, and our efforts continued to make sure that we are improving over time. In October of 2023, another report back was brought to the Accessibility Advisory Committee explaining the actions that had been undertaken and implemented in the efforts to ensure consistent, safe, well-marked, accessible routes for both pedestrians and cyclists. And just following that, the congestion management plan from Roger Brown's team was brought forward to City Council. And next slide. To give you a picture of the action plan and all the various pieces it includes, I will describe at a high level 4 different key streams of work that began in 2022 and are ongoing. And each of these streams of work has a number of different components. The first was engagement with the public and key interest groups to understand the problem and moving forward to get their feedback on what would be the best possible solutions. And we've been engaging even further to get iterative feedback on the success of implementing those solutions. The second key element of the work plan is updating standards, contract, and permit language to make sure that all of the public of the legal documents and the permit requirements going out to constructors have consistent expectations for accessibility in construction zones that are explained. The third work stream is training and internal change management with all relevant staff, recognizing that this isn't about one person creating some new rules. There's a role for many, many different people in the city who all have various roles in managing construction projects to make sure that they all understand the expectations and the different levers that they have in their role to be able to enforce those expectations. The fourth piece of the work plan is engagement with constructors and industry organizations to educate and reinforce these expectations and to provide examples of best practices about how this can be achieved in some of the unique road cross sections in the City of Toronto. And the final piece is the increase of enforcement for construction work zones and the compliance around the permit conditions. And there have been 11 new transportation standards officers hired to help carry out that enforcement. And now I will pass it back to Roger.
Great. And thank you, Jennifer. Really appreciate that summary. There we go. Just waiting for my image to come back. Really appreciate that summary, and I really also want to emphasize just the order of magnitude of that action plan that Jennifer outlined beforehand. It's very, very comprehensive. There's a recognition as we're going through this process, and through a bit of a fact-finding mission to really understand all the moving parts internally within the city, the dire need for us to really see a behavioral cultural shift in terms of how we view our construction work zone sites, how we manage them, how we communicate about what's there, how we work with our 311 folks as well too, to make sure that they're properly informed of what's out there, that they can properly respond to any issues and concerns that are raised by the public. This is a very, very significant undertaking, and we're very much at the early stages now of rollout and implementation. I do want to talk next about the engagement process and the key findings from that. Our engagement with you folks in the community and the issues that you brought to our attention to really make sure that everything that we're doing, that the idea, the plan that we had in mind is really incorporating input and feedback from you. So to that extent, I'd like to reintroduce Teresa to come back on and provide a bit of a summary in terms of that engagement process and key findings. Thanks, Teresa.
Awesome. Thank you, Roger. All right, so let's go to the next slide. And right here, you'll see that just over a year ago, from about October 2022 until January 2023, strategic policy and initiatives identified and carried out work to obtain both qualitative and quantitative input from Torontonians living with different types of disabilities regarding the barriers they encounter on the city's sidewalk and streets. We explored 6 categories of barriers, of which construction zones was one. The methods we used to get this information included hosting organizational interviews, organizational surveys, and a public and opinion survey. And on the screen, you can see the types of responses we got from that process. From our qualitative organizational interviews, some of the feedback we heard included access to sidewalks and streets is fundamental to our well-being and being able to participate in any meaningful way in the life of the city. We also heard that we live in a world-class city. However, our city does not reflect that we are world-class, the respect and notion of accessibility and inclusion for people with disabilities. We also heard that we've dealt with construction forever. Sidewalks are always blocked. There's cranes, trucks, asphalt, cement. There's never flaggers or spotters. So this gives a really strong flavor about, what is taking place and what the experience and feeling is of this community. Next, I'd like to talk about the needs assessment survey. Next slide. So for our needs assessment survey, based on the insights we received from our organizational interviews and survey, we structured a public survey that was aimed at the accessibility community. This image on screen shows the results from the representative public survey. There are 6 categories, including construction, seasonal maintenance, streets, including intersection, crosswalks, or bike lanes, sidewalks, storefront areas, including entrances and sideboards, and street furniture and other pedestrian amenities. 69% of respondents placed construction zones amongst their top 3 of 6 areas of concern regarding accessibility in the city's sidewalk and streets. Seasonal maintenance was the second most frequently selected at 48%. Going to our next slide. Given the feedback from the needs assessment survey, the team advanced construction-focused stakeholder engagement. From here, we created 2 stakeholder advisory groups with representatives from organizations and advocacy groups across Toronto to discuss issues related to pedestrians facing accessibility barriers in construction work zones and people cycling facing barriers in construction work zones. Structured workshops were developed based on the direct feedback from each stakeholder advisory group. 4 stakeholder workshops were held in May of 2023, with each workshop structured around 4 themes. These themes were identified by our stakeholder members. First, communication. Our second is safe path of travel, followed by training staff and enforcement. Each stakeholder advisory group discussed the same issues but met separately to allow each group to dig into the details related to accessibility as a pedestrian or as a cyclist in construction work zones. Eventually, both groups did come together for conversation. Several key issues were identified through our workshop discussion. On the table, I have highlighted the top 2 or 3 in each category. For communication, there's a vague understanding of construction management process amongst the members. And as a result, it was unclear about who or where to contact to address issues. And they were not aware of the impact of construction on pedestrians and cyclists, or there would be missing, inaccurate, conflicting information on construction detours. For safe path of travel, we heard that construction work zones prevented people from continuing along a desired path and often forced them into unsafe situations. Additionally, temporary pedestrian control measures often do not meet AODA and the Toronto Accessibility Design Guidelines. For training staff, this led to a discussion on staff and industry training and a need for comprehensive training on AODA standards. We also heard that motor vehicles often seem to be the main priority when setting up a construction work zone, and that all forms of mobility need to be addressed. And finally, we heard that enforcement around construction-related bylaw infractions and infractions of accessibility requirements were not well addressed or enforced, and that there needs to be regular enforcement conducted across our city. For slide 22, through the workshop discussions, we were able to identify some key recommendations. Developing public tools that outline the construction management process was part of our communications discussion. Additionally, centralized communication platform with clear information on closures and disruptions were also identified. To ensure a safe path of travel, a process to identify and mitigate construction-related barriers was highlighted, and this goes hand in hand with comprehensive training on AODA standards for staff. And finally, making AODA standards mandatory for all types of construction sites would address some issues around enforcement. All of these recommendations will be highlighted in the next section related to specific work programs that are currently underway. Back to Roger.
Great, and thanks, Teresa. I really appreciate that summary. And I did want to take a moment before we move to the next segment. As many of you on this call were involved in that stakeholder engagement, just to give a big warm thank you to all of you who were involved in that process. The information that you provided to us was invaluable. And quite frankly, there are some really, really key ideas and quite frankly, what we consider to be low-hanging fruit opportunities for things that we had already announced in our congestion management plan back in October last year, that are now going to be coming to the implementation stage this year. These are ideas that came from many of you on this call. And again, I really want to send a fond thank you to those who took the time to meet with us and provide that invaluable feedback. Next up, this is probably the most exciting part for me personally, is the current and ongoing work, and specifically highlighting some of the things that we're already starting to move on, and some of the tangible things you're going to start to see out in the field and on the systems going forward. And again, some of these things are immediately suggestions coming directly from that stakeholder consultation. So without further ado, I'd like to bring Stuart McGee. He's my manager of the Work Zone Coordination Program within my section and within Transportation Services, and to speak about the current and ongoing work. Stuart?
Thank you, Roger. And I want to thank everyone on this call that were part of that, the group where we got all of the information from. And we're taking a lot of what we heard and implementing it this year. One of the key things we heard was regarding the construction management process, and just not a clear understanding of how it works. So I want to start by saying that this slide that's up now, there's an accessible version of this image that will be made available after the town hall. So in the construction management process, there's really four main types of construction. We have City of Toronto contracts, we have utility permits, we have third party, and then we have private development. And what I mean by those is city contracts are the contracts that we create to look after our own infrastructure. Utility permits are in relation to gas, hydro, Rogers Bell. Third party are things like TTC, Metrolinx, and private construction is more along the lines of development sites. So out of all those four types, the process is quite similar. The only difference is how it's initiated. So specifically, city contracts. These are contracts that are tendered and awarded through the city for our infrastructure work. And then things like utility work, third-party work, or private construction, these are construction proposals that are submitted for approval, and it is reviewed and approved by city staff. So before permits can be received or permits issued, everything within the construction process has to meet the terms and conditions that the city set forth, such as for traffic management plans. They must meet the Ontario Traffic Manual design guidelines, such as Ontario Traffic Manual Book 7. Also, the Toronto Accessibility Design Guidelines, as well as the city's specifications on how things are built. Once that's been met and approved, permits are issued. Then we go to the next phase of notification. So notification is advising the community of the upcoming projects and the impacts of the construction work. And that's sent out through social media. It'll be sent through various newsprint, through the councillor's office, as well as you'll actually see construction advisory boards posted near the proposed construction site. Then it goes into active construction, which is the construction coordination, which is approved, monitored, implemented, and enforced by the city staff. And the last piece of this is feedback. So as you're traveling down the sidewalk or through cycling lane and you come into impacts through construction, that feedback is given back to the city through social media, through calling 311 directly, through your councillor's office, contacting staff directly, And then that information is then forwarded to the necessary staff that have the ability to make the corrections. Next slide, please. So what we're going to talk about here is the different training and the industry engagement that we've already put in place and will be coming to more fruition this year. So training modules on accessibility needs in construction work zones have already been rolled out to internal staff. There's mandatory training across the various division-led construction work. And there's also more mandatory training coming out with regards to cycling infrastructure. We've created tailgates and conversations and information to really make this part of our culture change. So as we're having our pre-construction meetings, as we're having our site meetings, and as we're having our staff meetings, we're really focusing our attention on accessibility and cycling needs. So we've established industry training, and we've already started consultation within the industry to ensure that accessibility standards will be adhered to moving into the year of 2024, as well also ensuring that there's safe paths of travel and that communication to users are being met. So we've also made changes to how we communicate and we engage with 311 and how those concerns and comments are received from the public and how they're addressed. So this will be referred to more in a couple slides, but this includes the information on and resources that where we've improved our online road restriction webpage. This is the reporting of work that happens within the road. Next slide, please. So we've already set new policies, standards, and specifications. We've updated our contract language to incorporate these new expectations. There's new specifications that were created in April of 2023. These will be out in tenders, construction tenders for this year. We've made revisions to the specifications of how the maintenance of traffic is going to be completed in 2024. We're also specifications in the construction tenders that reinforces all the priorities for accessibility and safety for pedestrians and people cycling. And it spells out what the requirements are, as well as things such as ramp locations, the widths, maximum slopes, acceptable materials. And this is now completed, but we've set the checklist for pedestrian accessibility in construction zones. This is a list of expectations agreed upon through all our different divisions, and it's being used to train the staff on and providing the job aids for site audits and the development of contracts and specifications. We've also had the ability to enhance our vendor evaluations, and they've been updated to include accessibility requirements. And what this is the tool that we as city staff now have the ability to actually grade our suppliers, our contractors, on the work that they do. So we've still seen it where sidewalks are blocked and there's nowhere to go, or cycling lanes are blocked. When we go and try to make changes and we don't get those, what we're looking for, and changes aren't implemented correctly or properly, we now have the ability to grade them poorly, and this is going to reflect in their ability to bid on future contracts. Next slide, please. So we're looking at ways to improve wayfinding around construction zones. I mean, everyone on this call knows what it's like to walk around or to get around the city, to cycle through the city. It's getting almost near impossible. There's mazes to get around of all the detours. We recognize it's imperative to ensure that these detour routes are well signed and accessible for everybody. Next slide, please. So we're working with our constructors to add wayfinding signs. These will be on all of our long-term or static, pedestrian detour routes, and to help implement the wayfinding around the construction zones. However, this approach won't work in all scenarios, such as short-term construction in relation to utility work, which are, a few days to a week. So one of our solutions that we've come up with, and we're in the process of implementing now, is QR codes. We want to leverage the ability of these QR codes to provide more details about the work zones in terms of pedestrian and cycling impacts, as well as wayfinding. Next slide, please. So the information on these QR codes, as you're using the sidewalks or the cycling lanes and constructions ahead, you'll start seeing these signs being implemented across the city. You'll be able to take a picture of the QR code, and it will show you who's doing the work, how long the work's going to take place, what's affected, what are the traffic impacts, sidewalks impacted, cycling infrastructure impacted, and how those are being dealt with. So it's going to show where that detour route goes. We're still in the process of fine-tuning this, and we actually need to engage you again for the best plan of action to implement this. Next slide, please. So the QR codes list the information on this new road restriction website. And the foundation for this new website has already been established. We're going through the troubleshooting phases now with a lot of our internal players. And what this is gives us the ability to provide 311 with more information. They'll actually have the detailed information of what that construction is about and the appropriate contacts, and be able to ensure that is being followed up with in an efficient manner. So with more explanation on this, those QR codes, when you're utilizing a sidewalk and come across construction and it doesn't meet the requirements set forth by the city, such as meeting accessibility or lanes are blocked or accessibility is blocked, you're able to take a picture of that QR code, contact 311 through it, and immediately isolate your concern for 311 to then pull up this website and be able to communicate that to the city staff that are effectively looking after that project in order to make the changes very quickly. So we're still working on the details before this becomes a front-facing website to the public, but we expect to see that within the next couple months. Next slide, please. So we still have more measures to come. We're looking to standardize approaches and finding consistencies in the terms of how we're going to implement and improve the accessibility measures. We need to further engage, as already discussed, with the accessibility community in order to for the support in the design and also within the decision-making process. Next slide, please. And next steps. Back to you, Roger.
Great. And thanks, Stuart. Yeah, as mentioned, really looking forward, particularly to this summer, where we're going to start seeing a lot of these things on the street. But I can't emphasize enough the importance of the need for us to engage with you on this call in terms of those next steps going forward. We have ideas that kind of get us started, but we need to go through each one of the ideas and further develop them to really have make sure that we have accessible options for each of these different measures that we're putting out there, but particularly with the QR codes approach. So just in terms of next steps, as mentioned, we've completed phase 1 of the consultation for spring summer engagement last year. And what's coming next is we are going to continue engaging in small focus groups on each of these specific projects that Stuart kind of mentioned, as well as some others that we have ongoing as well. And specifically with the intent of making sure that, you know, we're in keeping with the spirit of not trying to just do things for you, but rather to be doing things with you and really engaging you every step of the way and making sure that these measures that we're implementing do result in positive change. And once we have the joint understanding and buy-in of the success of any one of these particular things, then you're really going to start to see us aggressively move forward to implementing them as many construction work zone sites as we can, leading up to it ultimately becoming, you know, hard and fast mandatory requirements in the future. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, you know, we need further work. We need further engagement with you when it comes to these new measures, whether it's with respect to some of the new accessibility products and standardization. Again, this is one of the feedback that we got when we had the stakeholders group, that it's one thing to say if at a construction work zone, they were attempting to meet the accessibility needs, but the way in which they delivered it is different. And there's a dire need for acceptable solutions that are consistent across the city. And again, for us to achieve that, we really need to be engaging with some of you on this call to really kind of help us vet and make sure that these products, these technologies, the solutions that we're implementing are effective before we go and do heavy implementation across the city. The other example I have in terms of a focus group that I can see, as Stuart mentioned, we talked about the QR codes. We have to come up with a solution for how we can make that information as accessible as possible to everyone. For folks with visual impairment needs, for people who, some people prefer to call 311. How do we streamline that process? Some people do prefer to be leveraging their cell phone app. How can we build on the 311 application to include construction reporting features and maybe even go so far as automating the process based on your geocoded location so you can report things right there on the spot on site. But again, rolling with those types of pilots and making sure that we're doing things in a manner that are truly effective, we need to be engaging you through that process. We recognize the need for that, and that's a critical part of our plan going forward. Next slide, please. We are going to be continuing to engage City Council as we proceed through this process, and through that, obviously, there will be opportunities, not just in terms of you meeting with us on these specific individual projects, but certainly in terms of opportunities for you to depute the reports and have your say within council to make sure that council is aware of your thoughts on where we are with initiatives and any concerns that you have as we're rolling forward with them as well too. So to that end, we are planning on reporting to the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Group on February the 5th. And we are going to be providing an update on that work that took place over in the fall. And then following that later, I was going to say this month, I guess we're almost into February. On February 27th, we are going to be reporting again to the Infrastructure and Environment Committee on the Congestion Management Plan report. And again, in that report, we're going to be reporting back, I should say, on a number of motions that were raised by council when we presented back in October of last year. But I do want to highlight two key areas that we're going to be speaking to in that report about the improved wayfinding around construction work zones, as Stuart has mentioned, as well as status of the new QR code system and process, including content and likewise our strategy and plan going forward about how we're looking to make that information accessible for all road users. So on that note, if you move to the next slide, I'd like to thank all of you for attending here tonight. I'd like to thank our distinguished guests again who are on early in the call from City Council, as well as my staff, my team on this particular initiative. And on that note, I believe, if you move to the next slide, we are now able to open the floor to any questions or comments that you may have. Teresa, if I could bring you back to the stage.
Perfect. So we did have quite a few questions coming in over the chat, but I have noticed quite early on that Lanrick had his hand up earlier. So Lanrick, if your hand is up for a question, I'm going to unmute you now and you can ask it. Oh, I think I can unmute you.
So I was trying to put my hand down. So no question out there. Thank you so very much. I'm here just to listen, but appreciate. Sorry about that.
No worries at all. I am going to try to rotate between questions in the chat and those with their hands raised. I've been answering a couple questions in the chat. So the first one that's not answered quite yet, and I will review the others that has received an answer through text, is from Brian. The common dismount and walk signage is often seen as a hindrance to vulnerable road users having full legal use of the road. Can the single file signage be the new norm for all future construction projects? That, and in most cases of construction, the space blocked off for construction activity is often used for the parking of personal vehicles, which shouldn't be allowed, which could easily be parked on side streets. Does anyone want to address that on the project team? So the question is, can the single file signage be the new norm for all future construction projects?
Teresa, it's Stuart. I'll be happy to take this one.
Perfect.
So yes, I think that's exactly the path we're taking, is that when feasible, we will never have pedestrian or cyclists dismount and walk. It will become single file. In the extreme situations where we can't maintain safety, we'll detour cyclists if required. And then the point being made about parking within construction work zones, personal vehicles, I agree with you 100%, and we have been working on tightening up contract language to ensure that that practice is no longer being committed.
Perfect. Thank you. And I see Bob Murphy has his hand up next. So Bob, we are going to unmute you. I don't seem to be able to do that. There we go. Bob, yeah.
Can I be heard okay?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to make my question and comment as short as possible. And I'm referring to construction work zones. I'm a community member with a disability that navigates the TTC every day, and I'm also a cyclist. So I go through many construction zones, and we can go into the flaggers and the spotters, but that's not really the point I want to get across at this particular point. Is I haven't heard any talk, or maybe I could have missed it. Is there going to be any site visits in the future where you will have stakeholders, community members with various types of disabilities that will be navigating, or that are navigating all these construction zones? If we don't have the opportunity, those of us with lived experience, to have our voice heard, how are we really going to move forward, and how are we going to learn and make our pathways and roadways and sidewalks safe and for everybody? Thank you.
Yeah, that was an excellent question, and I really, really appreciate your concern in that regard. So we have actually been going through a restructuring of our work zone coordination units. And as part of our congestion management plan back in October, we announced to the councillors that we're starting a new approach whereby we're going to be having a dedicated senior PM working specifically within each ward and having regular meetings with the councillor and going over issues of work zones within their ward. And it's very much the intent to work through the councillor to arrange for these sort of engagement opportunities One of the key things I learned through the engagement process last year is the critical need for lived experience support to our thinking, to our decision making, to our training of our staff of how to look at these situations. And so I really, really want to take advantage of the opportunity for greater engagement with the public, and specifically people that can provide us with that lived experience lens to do those walkarounds on the work sites through the senior PM that's been assigned. And then that senior PM has the authority within the work zone coordination group to see to it that priority has been given to any changes that are necessary within those work zones to make them more accessible. So these are all things that are coming down the pipe, and we've just been taking the first kind of early steps at restructuring our work zone coordination unit and staffing up in terms of resources, filling our vacancies to make sure that we've got adequate resources that we can really start in the spring, summer of this year to start seeing and doing more of that type of engagement. But the intent, the spirit intent is that we would be trying to work through our counselor to make sure that they're engaged in the process, and through them to be connecting with you.
Thank you very much for your response. Construction zones for me is progress, and for those of us with lived experience to have an opportunity to engage is not just about being listened to, but is to being heard. And thank you very much for your response. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. I will go to a question in the chat box, and I apologize if I'm enunciating this wrong. We have a question from Shraddha. Her question is, when a major cycling artery is blocked off, for example, Adelaide, can the city provide an alternate car-free artery for cyclists to ride safely? Merging with car traffic is a hectic construction work zone during rush hour, is stressful, and feels quite unsafe.
If I can start with the answer and then maybe turn it to Stuart to add to this. But I am trying to make it a very, very strict mandate going forward that we try to preserve cycling and pedestrian infrastructure on construction work zones to the greatest extent possible. I've provided this direction to Stuart's team, and they have been really taking this to heart most recently in terms of looking at our work zones and really trying to exhaust every possible option when it comes to trying to maintain infrastructure. And I want to emphasize that on the go forward, if we are in a situation where we have to compromise that infrastructure, then we're going to look to providing any sort of safe, viable alternatives. On one hand, you could argue from a legal perspective, there's nothing wrong with having a cyclist riding in mixed traffic. On the flip side, we totally recognize that with all the construction capacity that's been removed from the road network, the driving community is a lot more aggressive than they've ever been. And as a result, it's not enough to say, well, legally, technically, that's okay. We really have to do everything we can to try to maintain the infrastructure, and if not, provide some sort of a safe, viable alternative. One of the things we're also looking at on the go forward is when we do get to those very difficult situations whereby the nature of construction means that there's no way that we can maintain the existing infrastructure, that we look for opportunities for greater engagement with the public on those decisions, especially on those projects where we see the occupation is going to be for multiple years. Every project should have that lens, but particularly with the ones where we're hearing it's going to have a multi-year impact, we need to make sure that there's a safe, accessible, viable alternative for residents to navigate the neighborhood. I don't know, Stuart, if there's anything you want to add?
The only thing I could really add to this is we're implementing a culture change, right? How we did culture or how we did construction and mitigated the impacts before this is kind of archaic, and how we're moving is in a totally different direction than what we're used to. I mean, all I can say is everyone on this call is going to see significant changes.
Awesome, thank you. And with that, we'll move to our next question from our speaker list. Jennifer Ward has her hand up. If we can get her unmuted. Perfect, Jennifer.
Hi, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Great, thank you. I've observed that most cyclists, when told to share the lane when they have to be in the middle of streetcar tracks, will usually choose to instead go through the construction zone, through bollards, to avoid having to get into those streetcar tracks. I know myself, when I attempted to do so at Spadina in college, ended up being thrown off my bicycle in front of moving traffic because my tire got into those streetcar tracks. Yes, and cyclists just noticed that there seemed to be room in the rightmost lane to make temporary cycling infrastructure during that time, and that's been brought up all year. So to summarize, I'm wondering if the city is going to commit to not having the solution to construction zones be putting cyclists in the middle of streetcar tracks. Like, I understand it when there's no streetcar lanes, having cyclists share the road, but it's very difficult to navigate that space.
No, I really sincerely appreciate that question and comment as well too. Again, that's a perfect example of those really challenging situations where, for whatever reason, if there's construction and it has to impact the infrastructure that's there by way of cycling infrastructure, definitely we need to take a close look at those situations. If the solution is to move people into, lanes with streetcar tracks, again, to see if there's any other alternative that we can look at. I do also want to address your comment about whether or not there's space for the cycling infrastructure in those work zones, given the size and dimension, that sort of thing. Again, those are all things that my staff are really going to be taking a close look at if there are opportunities to shave off some of that work zone to accommodate any way that we can maintain the cycling infrastructure. That being said, I've actually had a few already come across my desk in terms of escalations where, what appeared to be an opportunity to provide or maintain the cycling infrastructure, when I heard the nature of the construction, there are various stages in that work zone where basically, the concern that we had is it would be unsafe to have cyclists driving through that portion that we could try to recover. And really, the direction angle that myself and the team took was to try and see if there's just another alternative. Again, away from forcing cyclists to go into the cycle tracks lane, but to see if there's any other sort of alternative that we could do. And there are some innovations that the team has come up with. The idea of pulling back a portion of the work zone so there could be a bike box, like a green bike box established in front of the queue of vehicles, and then having a leading bike interval. So in other words, the green light for bikes come up first. So you literally have the ability to cut the queue of vehicles through the one little section of mixed traffic and then back out again. There's a number of things that we've been trying. But again, admittedly, there's a lot from the past that sort of got past us. And in fact, we may have to go back to some of the existing sites, like the one you mentioned, to revisit and see what opportunities there are to improve what's there.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. I am going to the chat box, and there are a couple of questions from Holly, Adam, and Donna that are kind of related. So I will go through all of them for you guys. In the construction process, who is responsible for approving the accessibility and cycling measures to be put in place? Why are private construction projects allowed to use the public right-of-way? And if you can please talk about how a construction safety plan is approved before construction starts and how enforcement will work. So this is more of the process sort of picture.
Yep, this is right down my alley. Okay, so when it comes to reviewing and approving traffic management plans, that actually comes under the review of my team. So I have a team of senior project managers, project leads, as well as work zone coordinators. They're all assigned to various areas throughout the city, and their job is to review these to ensure that various safety aspects of that construction work zone is being met. as well as protecting, pedestrians and cyclists, but also liability and other safety concerns that are present. Regarding the question of why do we allow private development to use the city right-of-way, in many cases, we don't have the opportunity. There's no other opportunity. Builders are, permitted to build lot line to lot line, which means in many situations they're allowed to, build pretty much up to the back edge of the sidewalk. And then in order to, especially when we're looking at places in the downtown core, there's nowhere for them to, conduct their work from. There's, where do we put cement trucks? Where do we put, the dump trucks and everything else that are, driving around? How do we hoist steel? So, and this is the reason why they end up, applying and in most cases being permitted to use the right of way. And Teresa, I'm not too sure what the last question was.
Last question was if you can talk to the construction safety plan, how that's approved before construction starts and how enforcement works.
Okay, so the that's actually the safety aspect is done through my team as mentioned. And then the enforcement aspect of this is if when we receive concerns or we get notification of issues that are happening on those sites, my team will do their best to try and solve those by speaking directly to the contractor to, for corrective actions. In the situations that can't be corrected, we'll reach out to our enforcement teams to attend, and then they will do what they can to gain compliance. And then when necessary, they'll lay charges.
Perfect. Did you answer the portion about private construction projects occupying the streets as well?
Yep.
Oh, perfect. Sorry about that.
If I can add to Stuart's answer, by the way, the one key thing I really do want to point out is, given the incredible volume of construction on the city streets, the process that we have, and again, that construction management process, as Stuart had on the slide deck a bit earlier, we are going to be making an accessible version of that image available after the town hall that provides all that detail that you're asking for about who does what. It is very staff intense, and I just want to share with everyone the harsh reality that a lot of those resources that Stuart's talking about in terms of the senior PMs and the project leads were literally only hired last year. The volume of construction work exponentially increased over the past few years through the pandemic and even into now and going forward, and at a rate far faster than we're able to basically grow our work zone coordination team. So, and likewise, when it comes to enforcement, as Stuart mentioned, the transportation standards officers are responsible for enforcement. We actually lost a huge amount of our staff force during the pandemic to people taking jobs elsewhere and other opportunities, or just suddenly the interest in staff, who want to work from home as opposed to taking jobs that have them out in the field all the time. A variety of different reasons, but either way, we caught ourselves in a bit of a situation whereby, from a resource point of view, despite the various roles and responsibilities, not having enough staff to basically stay on top of things. And so literally it was for the most part last year that we were able to sort of rebuild our staff forces, and we're still working on doing that right now. But even in bringing those people on board last year, there's still a lengthy training process, an engagement process to getting them fully up to speed and fully engaged with the community and the councillors in terms of rectifying these outstanding issues. So to that end, that's part of the reason why, for example, in the previous year, you may be seeing a number of poor examples. And these are all things that on the go forward, with the resources that we have and that we're continuing to build them on, that I really do foresee us being able to do a much better job of doing those inspections, implementing the enforcement, and again, nothing but support as well from all the internal groups like our engineering construction services folks, and certainly the conversations we've had with TTC and Metrolinx. Everybody is on board with the new direction that we need to be taking, the new emphasis, I should say, in the direction that we're taking towards safer and accessible construction work zones going forward.
I'll jump in and add one more piece there. I know it, as a pedestrian myself, it would feel really great if I could snap my fingers and have an enforcement officer there every time I see a problem. But as Roger has pointed out, the staffing challenge relative to the amount of construction that we have is challenging. And that's why we're not just engaging the work zone coordinators. We're not just engaging the enforcement officers. Everybody who has any role in contributing to a construction project in the city is getting training. So these are contract administrators and project managers who are overseeing public projects in the right of way. These are site inspectors who are hired to inspect the quality of work that the contractors are doing in the right of way. These are the 311 operators, although they are more dealing with the public rather than out in the field. The idea is that the more eyes that we have on the street who understand what the expectations are, the better chance that we have of communicating through pre-construction meetings, through the legal language in contracts and permits, through site meetings and health and safety trainings. We are trying to elevate this to the level that health and safety for workers has been brought to over the last couple of decades through a lot of hard work. And we want to make sure that this is treated at the same level, but it doesn't happen overnight. And it's a process of constant reminders and engaging as many people as possible so that we don't only rely on the enforcement, the individuals who have an enforcement role. We rely on everybody who has some kind of influence on the project.
Perfect, thank you. I will go to one of the hands up. So Allison Stewart, you've had your hand up. We'll unmute you now to ask your question.
For your Oh, okay. Sorry, it was talking to me. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. I have, I guess, two main questions. One regarding Stuart's comment about part of the work ahead is regarding a culture shift, a change, and how the city is planning, managing, and prioritizing the safety around construction zones. One of the questions I had was, what can we do to support you with all of your efforts, especially because Roger had mentioned that on February 5th, report will be coming to the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and on February 27th, it'll be coming to IEC. My second question is somewhat of a segue, and that is, over the past year, we have seen several of our key cycling routes and pedestrian routes, I'll add, that have been impacted by construction, and the bikeways have been closed and forced to merge with traffic. And along lines such as Bloor, Danforth, and Yonge that have the subway, what will it take for the city to sort of help expedite that culture change by directing single vehicular traffic to, elsewhere, on the grounds that, the single car travelers take up such a majority of space, and that would free up more room for the real accessibility issues and need to drive, as well as facilitating EMS and contractors to get around. So where is the city appetite for those discussions, and how can we help expedite those?
Actually, if I can, thanks, Allison. By the way, good to hear from you on the call.
Yeah.
And looking forward to actually connecting with you a bit on some of this stuff when I go forward. There's first off, if I can speak to the behavioral cultural shift, I think one of the biggest things that we found through the fact finding last year was this kind of sentiment that, everybody feels the importance and need to ensure the accessibility of work zones or maintaining pedestrian and cycling infrastructure on the long-term construction. But the sort of sentiment sometimes you hear is, well, we're only going to be there for a few days, or we're only going to be there for a week. Is there a need for us to make all these accommodations when we're only going to be there for a short duration? So that's really the kind of behavioral cultural shift that we need to deal with, is to make sure, and I think over the past year we've accomplished that. This is what we found last year when we're kind of doing our internal conversations, but getting everybody on board with the thinking that it's not acceptable to say, well, we're only there for a week or a few days. From the perspective of residents, it's every single day. And yes, your construction may only be there for 2-3 days. You come off the right of way, and then there's another one. And everyone that pops up of these short duration nature, where we're not looking at this stuff, creates this continual problem of inaccessible work zones, or cases where we're compromising on cycling or pedestrian infrastructure in any way, shape, or form, with the invalid excuse of saying it's only going to be for a short duration. So I think we're past that now in terms of making sure that staff have that proper understanding and that kind of shift in thinking. And now we're moving on to the sort of implementation stage of how do we go about now making sure that these things are baked into our processes, that it's not something that people have to be nudged and reminded of. It's inherent to the process going forward. When it comes to where you can help, I've already given direction to Nathan, and you may have actually gotten calls from Nathan directly on this, but quite frankly, I guess the direction going forward is we really do want to be engaging with the public on some of these decisions, the more critical ones. There's many situations where they're easy and we can figure out how to maintain infrastructure. But in the cases where we really are stumped, we want to engage you guys in the process, if and when possible, into that conversation. And we've kind of started, again, Nathan on the day-to-day management of the operation has already started in that process of trying to reach out on a case-by-case basis and get those conversations going to say, okay, we've really hit that point where we cannot figure out any way to maintain this infrastructure. What are the alternatives? What are the ways to kind of get around it that are acceptable, kind of thing. And really taking a little bit more of a collaborative approach to that in terms of engaging and trying to factor that into our process before it gets to community council and the staging report. So I really am looking forward to the future, and I appreciate your help in particular in some of this. And quite frankly, my intent and direction to the team is to do more of that sort of engagement in the decision-making process.
Great, thank you for that. And I guess, sorry, just the follow-up regarding, in one of the motions, it was mentioned the consideration for a mobility squad that would help with the enforcement of, the construction zones, just to help with the day-to-day surprises. It would be wonderful if the team could use e-bikes as a way of helping expedite your bylaw officers so they're not stuck in traffic and they are getting that live experience of biking on our streets.
That's an excellent suggestion. I could certainly take it back to the other director, Antonio Marcos, who looks after that group. That's a great point.
Perfect. Thank you, Allison. Going to the chat box, I had a couple questions related to access, but first a comment from John M. Cannot have access for some or access delayed. It must be access for all. And then he goes on to ask, how will the QR codes useful for someone who has a visual disability? There needs to be consultation with visual disability organizations. As well, people with disabilities live in poverty and often do not have access to smart cell phones. Plain language is necessary, and how do you plan on addressing this?
Excellent question. So admittedly, this is a starting point. With anything and everything that we do, it is imperative that we are consulting with members of the community to help us come up with these solutions. This is an initiative that, as far as we know, no one else, certainly in Ontario and possibly the country, has sort of gone to the level we've been going to in terms of trying to provide more information about construction work zones to the residents through any means, whether QR codes or otherwise. But we have to keep working at this plan to make sure that we make it accessible for everyone. not just the few. And to that end, as part of our next steps, we are going to be engaging with small focus groups to specifically look at some of the different technologies and ideas that are out there that we can leverage. We're actually looking to engage with consultant support as well too, to look at the wide world, I should say, of transportation technologies that are catered specifically towards supporting accessibility needs, and to try to see if there's opportunities to leverage those technologies specifically to help us in terms of taking some of these basic ideas that we have and ensuring that they're accessible. But regardless, the key piece is whatever ideas we come up with, we have to engage people in the community, people on this call, to make sure that these are measures that are actually helpful and actually meet those requirements and needs that you have.
Awesome, thank you. I'll let our interpreters trade off. But the next step is Adam. Adam, we'll unmute you now to ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So I won't belabor you with a specific problem area, but as a Ward 3 resident in Etobicoke, we have quite a lot of, to use a colloquial term, stroads. And I have a particular street, Queensway, that I think of that it has a couple problematic job sites that will lead to some sidewalk closing that I think were unavoidable. But unfortunately, sometimes the alternative is to send people across the street on Queensway to go around. And human nature being on a street like Queensway, if you have to go all the way across and then walk all the way down, there is a real concern of people just walking around onto the street, onto the road. And I guess the long story short is some of our streets are not like others. Some of them are very, very wide, like a Queensway. What are the considerations for these type of sites and those situations where we must close the sidewalk? I'm a site in mind, but I won't name it just because. But I'm sure that people are probably aware of the one I'm talking about. So.
Yeah, so again, if I can feel that, so again, I can't speak to the specifics of that, although I totally understand your concern and very familiar with the Queensway as well. That being said, going back to my earlier comment in terms of the restructuring of the work zone coordination unit, where on the go forward, we've got a dedicated senior PM on a ward by ward basis. One of the things I'm going to be asking those folks to do. Oh, sorry. Yeah, one of the things I'm going to be asking those folks to do with the local councillor is to engage local community with respect to those walkarounds, to really try and catch and identify these types of issues, and to work collectively in terms of ways of what are alternative ways to get around it, and to recognize, as you say, in that particular scenario, again, I'm very familiar with that area and the Queensway. I totally understand the issue concern. I think that it's important that we take the time to do a bit of a walk around and to engage the community in that, and to basically see what alternatives we can present to avoid that situation that you described. Really appreciate that comment, by the way.
Yeah, sorry about that noise, that toddler being required in the background. I'm going to mute myself, but thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you. Appreciate the question again.
Awesome. I've got an earlier question in the chat box again from Shraddha. Will we get an alternative to the big steel plates on construction work zone streets? These plates aren't flushed with the street, creating an additional hazard for cyclists and merging with car traffic and reduce Lane Street, especially as we merge at an angle. It's really stressful.
So I'll answer that. And it's funny, I was just actually typing the response in the question box. But steel plates are actually by law that they're supposed to be flush with the roadway for many reasons. They're supposed to be non-slip. And the reason why we want these to be flush with the roadway, especially in the wintertime, is plows hit them and then move plates. And then we have an open pit. And, there are many situations where, incidents do happen. So this is something that we have been pushing for from various groups in the city to ensure that these plates are countersunk as they're supposed to be. It's written in all the contracts, and I think it's some housekeeping that we have to do on our side. So we are fully cognizant of this, and we are making steps to ensure that's consistent across the city.
Thank you, Stuart. We'll go on the hands up to Sarah Elton. Sarah, we'll get you unmuted now to ask your question.
First of all, I understand how complex this is. So kudos to you for trying to deal with all these competing interests. And I appreciate that you say that the city will do its best to make sure cyclists don't enter the driving lane when either the bike lane is closed, or as happened to me today, the sidewalk and the parking lane were closed and I had to cross over streetcar tracks into Gerrard with cars coming behind me at way over the speed limit. So that was utterly terrifying. But I understand that you say that you will try to avoid this, but I just want to flip this. Like, what if we said we will not close the driving lane for cars unless we absolutely have no choice, right? Like, you'd laugh. It would be comical. You're like, what do you mean? We'll always give pedestrians and cyclists the right of way. Of course, like, cars obviously have to go. But I think, like, why can't the city take the same definitive stance against closing bike lanes and sidewalks and make it impossible? Otherwise, we do make it impossible for people to access the streets. Like, I've heard mothers say they will not cycle on Danforth now, near Pape and Danforth, because the bike lane is shut, and it's just absolutely terrifying to enter the road. And we know how aggressive and angry many drivers are. When I cycle through near, I just don't understand how it's still blocked at Sherbourne, just east of Sherbourne on Bloor. It's utterly terrifying. And there's some days where I'm a driver too. I'll just like, I don't have the courage today. I'm just going to drive because it's so scary. So I think this is an equity issue. I have the choice to take my car, but lots of people don't. And you really feel like you're taking your life in your hands when you go out into traffic, regardless of whether there's a streetcar. I have been almost run off the road at several times in these situations. I jumped off my bicycle. And so I just would ask, please, is it possible just to rule this out in the same way we would never shut down a driving lane to cars and just let pedestrians and cyclists take over the road? Let's have the same. Is that not possible to have the same policy for vulnerable road users?
If I can start by saying that this is really the key mandate of our thinking going forward, is to try to do everything we possibly can to ensure that cycling and pedestrian infrastructure is maintained. And if for whatever reason it absolutely positively can't, and by the way, I want to emphasize, going back to my earlier comment, that even I don't think that necessarily has been exercised in the past, because again, we just didn't even have the resources to kind of stay on top of it. But on the go forward, and quite frankly, even looking back retrospectively at existing work zones within wards, we really want to take this kind of lens that you described of maintaining this infrastructure to the greatest extent possible. Again, certainly from my perspective, when it comes to traveled lanes, this is not about making sure we have a lane for cars. This is about making sure we have a lane for emergency vehicles and for transit. And again, Stuart, myself, the other manager, Nathan, we've had conversations on situations where we looked at scenarios and even said, maybe in this situation here, we would restrict cars and only allow emergency vehicles, transit, pedestrians, and cyclists. So we're already in that kind of mindset on the go forward, and we've got the resources to sort of stay on top of it on the go forward. So really, this is the type of thinking that we're looking to take going forward. And also, as I say, at existing work zones, to revisit those to see what, if anything, can be done. And if, again, we really find there's no other way in terms of maintaining that existing infrastructure, and we're trying to come up with some sort of alternative way to navigate that area through another alternate route for cyclists or some sort of pedestrian detour route, that we improve upon our engagement with the local residents in that regard. And certainly with the advocacy groups as well too, to look at some of these scenarios where we really kind of hit that stumbling block, and have some ideas, but we need to be engaging with you as much as possible through that final decision-making process to see, are these acceptable solutions? And maybe collectively we can work together to try and find some other way. And again, we're the experts in the sense that we can bring and present a number of ideas to the table, but quite frankly, you're also experts because you're in that neighborhood, you're navigating that on a regular basis. You understand the day-to-day dynamic better than we do at that microscopic level. So it's important for us to really engage with you on these case-by-case scenarios as well, and give that opportunity for more of a collaborative approach to finding solutions in those really challenging situations.
Thank you for answering my question and for what sounds like a very bold approach, which we need because people with cars really do have the power in many ways, and that needs to be equalized a bit. So thank you.
Right. Thank you, Sarah. So I've got a question in the chat box, and it might be aligning in the same queue for Ben, who's also waiting with his hand. So I'm going to read the chat box question. I'll have staff address it. Ben, you can add to it if this is your question. If not, if it's a different Ben, you can ask your question next. So we need better practices in dealing with closures in protected bike lanes, such as those with curbs or poured barriers. A shut down lane mid-block may force a cyclist to pick up their bike and carry it into traffic or the sidewalk if it's open. This has been raised in terms of, has this been raised in terms of improved wayfinding?
Yeah, this is definitely part of our culture change. The object, I mean, I don't know how we can stress this any further, but our goal is to make sure that the vulnerable road user is being maintained in a safe manner all the way through their travels. So when there is a mid-block closure, the idea is for wayfinding is to ensure that that notification is provided to people utilizing sidewalks or in the cycling lanes well in advance, and giving you the choices of how you want to move forward. I mean, there are going to be situations where there's not much that can be done because of the restrictions within the roadway. So providing you the opportunity in making sure that you're fully aware that you may have to share the lane further up ahead, and if not, then here's an alternative route to get around that area. So that's our goal moving forward, is to ensure that these type of things are fully brought to your attention, not when you hit it, but well in advance of arriving to that scenario.
Perfect, thank you. And then we're going to check in with Ben to see if this is the same Ben I just asked the question of. We'll unmute you now. Ben? Oh, can we get Ben unmuted? Hi, Ben, are you there?
I'm here. I'm the same Ben.
Okay.
Sorry, I should give a full name. Thanks everyone for all your answers. And yeah, that was a solid answer in terms of that specific question. I had, since the time I put that question in the chat, I had kind of a separate one I could ask, if that's not considered cheating.
That's fine, go right ahead.
I guess, oh gosh, so many things. It was brought up earlier, this new website that you're working on or troubleshooting right now that's going to have road closures, basically, right? In some kind of a sort of a map-based format that looks very color-coded and cool. I mean, this kind of brings up to me like a larger issue that I struggled with over the few decades I've been in Toronto, and in recent years where these tools are available and the technology's there. Trying to find out, like, where is a closure going to be? Where is a route change going to be? As a cyclist, you're moving through wards, you're moving across the city often. depending on your level of, fitness and gumption, you might be go from Etobicoke to Scarborough in a ride. And so often myself and other cyclists have found just closures, unexpected closures, trails are closed, bike paths are closed, lanes are closed. So I've just been hoping over the years for some kind of a tool where it would be map-based, it would be easy to see, and it could be specifically looked at in terms of a cyclist's needs, or also possibly pedestrians, people with disabilities, etc. And does this, have the potential to be a solution to that kind of an issue where it's user-friendly, we can access it and find out sort of where we might need to reroute if needed in advance and not have those unpleasant surprises. So yeah, if anyone has an answer to that, that'd be great.
That's an excellent question. One of the things that's a bit of a work in progress right now is a feature on the new website where you have the ability to plug in your origin and your destination, and then it provides you with a list of all the construction closures, related closures on that path. But more importantly, not just that there's a construction closure on that path, but there's an impact to the cycling infrastructure whereby there's a detour, or there's an impact to the pedestrian infrastructure whereby it's either a protected path or a detour or something of that nature. And you can literally click and drag, sort of like you've seen how in Google, you can do that sort of origin destination and it gives you a route. You can click and drag the route. And as you click and drag the route, it'll automatically tell you what the impacts are on that particular given route. And you could literally map out a route that at least, I don't know if you'll be able to avoid all the construction work zones, given how many there are in the downtown core in particular, but certainly to minimize the number that you encounter on your path. This was actually an idea that came from our stakeholder advisory group from earlier last year. And we presented this to the vendor that's helping us to develop the page. And quite frankly, they're really excited about that, to provide that feature and functionality. I do also want to emphasize, though, that again, we're going to do the best that we can with respect to that new and improved web page to provide all this information and features and functionality. But I also think an imperative piece to that is that there's ability for us to share all of this information through open data in a manner where there are applications that people in the accessibility community use, like Accessible Now, things like that. We want to make sure that all of this information that we have is accessible and open and usable for those other apps as well, to basically take that in. Again, it's one thing for the city to have a new and improved road restriction webpage, but quite frankly, if you're an avid user of a different app and that's your preference, we want to make sure that the information, the data about road closures and the duration of those closures, and whether or not cycling or pedestrian infrastructure is impacted, and if so, how, all that information needs to be made available through our open data portal so that those other third-party applications can have that data and incorporate it. And we're very much open to the opportunity to work with those other apps to make sure that they have access to our data and they can incorporate them in a meaningful way.
Perfect. All right, thank you. Now we are rounding in the last 10 minutes, so I will ask a couple more questions. We'll take the last one, that's the hand up as well. But first, a comment from Lorenzo. A great way to engage stakeholders in a meaningful way and provide design guidance is to use a walking audit. So thank you for that comment. We're making note of all of these, and also too, I do note that there are a couple questions in the chat box that we have not addressed. We'll be documenting all of this and answering them in a Word document, which will be circulated. So if you have a question that you don't think we're going to get time to, you can still toss it in the chat box and we will address it later offline. The next question I have is from Sarah Ann. On behalf of my work area, my workplace is on an extremely busy area, and we have individuals, believe you mean by, who have disabilities in a senior's home. We need to improve the traffic lights since I have seen some accidents that took place. Who should we contact or advocate for our people that we support their safety?
Yeah, if I can respond to that as well. So 311 is really intended to be the official best way to get the attention of staff, to respond on issues, for follow-up on issues. So any issues, complaints that you have with respect to, particularly with respect to traffic signals that go through 311, they get routed to my staff who do traffic signal investigations, and they will investigate it. They'll see if your name is there in your contact, they'll follow up with you. Depending on the nature of the issue, they may meet with you on site if that makes sense, or if it's a case where you can just explain in detail the issue. And they have the ability to go in and make those types of traffic signal modification timing changes, or if there's a need for some sort of a physical modification. Likewise, my team looks after the design of the signals, and we can make all those changes. I do want to emphasize, though, that as part of this whole exercise, we are working to provide better information to 311. Because it's been, with all the construction that's suddenly shown up on our doorstep, it's almost been a bit of a moving target for them to be staying on top of that. And the new road restriction webpage that we're talking about has a back end that actually provides a lot more valuable information to 311 at their fingertips. That will make them a lot more responsive and knowledgeable about whether it's traffic signal issues or construction related issues, knowing right away who it is and who's doing the work and who they need to contact. Going back to Stuart's diagram about the process, there are a lot of parties out there that are doing construction on the right of way. So really it's imperative for us to be leveraging the technology to make sure that the 311 people have all that information at their fingertips, that they can very quickly respond to issues and make sure that problems get directed to the right person right away. The sooner they get directed to the right person, the sooner we can get on top of resolving the issue. And admittedly, in the past, that has been an issue, is just trying to track down which contractor, which traffic lights, who's looking after which, all those types of things, which on the go forward is being resolved as we speak through the new technology that we're implementing.
Thank you. And we'll go to our last hand up, which is Shraddha. So if we can have her unmuted.
Very much for tonight's session. And my name is Shraddha Pai. I didn't know if people put their last names on for this kind of thing. So I understand that you're in the middle of a complex process with a lot of uncertainty, but I'm wondering, next summer when we're biking on Adelaide, going west to east, what is going to be different for sure? And what is going to be different with some relative certainty? How is my commute going to be safer? I also want to share that, last summer, I had this very scary experience going from, the west end to the east end in the area in Adelaide, and this place where I had to merge with the car traffic, and we had those wonderful steel plates that were not flush. And I was merging at an angle, and my wheel hit it at this angle, and I started weaving back and forth with this kind of impatient rush hour traffic behind me. And I was half afraid I was going to fall over in the middle of traffic. And heaven knows if they would have stopped or what would have happened. Luckily, I didn't lose my balance, but it was, I still think about it, right? And similarly, like you wonder about going home safe to your kids and things. So what is going to be different for sure? And what's, relatively certain in terms of safety improvements?
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate your comment there. I have a few points to respond, and Stuart, if you want to add, but we absolutely need to be doing a better job. There's no question about that. And as I mentioned beforehand, again, for all the different reasons through the pandemic and everything, in terms of us, not having the resources to really stay on top of some of these issues. And when I say us, I don't mean just specifically just work zone coordination, but across the board. Because going back to the process, there's so many different players involved and constructors doing work on the right of way that this project has kind of uncovered the need for us to basically engage each and every one of these groups to make sure that they're all on side with the way of thinking. With the steel metal plate, you mentioned it, and actually we heard it a couple times this evening about the imperative nature for us to really, really make sure that when those are implemented, number one, they're using the non-slip plates, and number two, they're, as Stuart mentioned, basically installed properly so that you don't have a lip or anything like that. Like, it should be flush with the pavement. so you don't have those types of issues. And again, the idea of having the additional resources by way of the senior PMs, project managers that are working with councillors, that we can do these engagements, these walkarounds, to go and inspect the sites and see what opportunities there are to improve, identify the major issues. We haven't had that in the past. This is all new. And as Stuart mentioned, you know, we're going through the whole training and onboarding of the staff that this spring, this summer, we're going to be starting to roll forward with greater engagement with the councillors and with local residents in their wards on the various issues, to try and see how much we can improve, not just in terms of the new projects that are coming down the pipe, but again, retrospectively, looking back at some of the existing issues that are there. And again, and some of that stuff has already started as we're hiring senior PMs and they're fully trained. We've already started engaging with councillors like Councillor Malik, you know, in terms of just the fact that there's such a tremendous amount of construction going on just in her ward alone. And again, as we build up staff and the staff are trained, we're going to continue rolling forward and engaging the various councillors, particularly in the downtown core, where we're seeing such an incredible amount of construction activity, to see what we can do and how we can do better. That's basically it. Sorry, Stuart, I don't know if there's anything more you want to add to that.
No, you summed that up perfectly. Sorry, I'm just typing out some emails or some messages to some of the questions.
Yeah, responding in the chat.
Well,
Thank
you
you. I
very
really
much.
appreciate your question.
I would just briefly say that perhaps if there is a way to kind of, through an app, log, I don't know if there's a way to do this honorably, but a way to log incidents so that you can sort of pick up on sites and prioritize places where people seem to be encountering difficulties. Perhaps that can help you allocate your resources better. But thank you very much.
No, I appreciate that comment as well.
Awesome. Perfect. So those are all of our hands up questions. We do have quite a few questions in our chat box, but as I noted, we are out of time. We will be copying these questions, and we'll be responding to them with information that will be circulated after this meeting. I do want to take a moment and thank our ASL providers that are here today. So Jamie, Christy, and Sarah, who have been supporting all of our translation services. Thank you so much for your support this evening. And for someone else who's been behind the scenes, Mandy from Technology Services, that has been providing pretty much the functioning of this entire webinar tonight. So thank you for that. With that, I will hand it over to Roger for any final notes.
Yeah, again, I want to thank everybody for attending this evening. Really, really appreciate your time and your valuable input throughout the process. Again, want to thank all the folks who were involved in our stakeholder engagement last year. The input that you provided us was invaluable. And as I mentioned beforehand, the team are really, really eager to start seeing some very positive change in the coming months ahead in that respect. I do want to thank, again, likewise, the American Language Services folks, Jamie, Christy, and also the Communication Access Real-Time Translation, Sarah Ashley as well too. Really, really appreciate you guys being on this call and helping out in that regard. I want to thank the team, all the members on the team who helped us in terms of all the work that's been going on over the past year, and certainly in preparing for this evening tonight, and with respect to the acknowledgements as well too. I really like to thank all of the folks on this call, and I strongly encourage you to to continue staying engaged, and to sign up for our emailing list to receive updates. I believe, not sure it's available if it's through the chat or on that screen there, accessiblecwz@toronto.ca. And again, thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Take care.